Mr. Adam Borowski, an international relations analyst. Adam, a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us as usual.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get to what they might be discussing right now at the meeting in Prague. I assume one of the biggest things right now, as we all know, the city of Kharkiv is a sitting duck. It's impossible for Ukraine to defend the city as it's so close to the Russian border, and they have units right there. And without the ability to take those units out, like I said, they're a sitting duck. What can be done here?
Well, luckily, as you know, Joe Biden has authorized, given permission for Ukraine to strike Russian positions, but only, of course, near Kharkiv on the border with Russia and on the Russian territory. And that, of course, helps a lot. They can't strike beyond that.
Okay, this permission has been granted. Is this a new thing?
Yes, it's been granted yesterday. Basically, Joe Biden has given that permission, but only around Kharkiv, only around that area, of Russia, Russian soil. So they can only strike, Ukrainians can only strike that region close by, but it's still better than nothing. Of course, there is still this, escalation fear, which to me, it's really strange because on one hand, of course, when you say escalation, you obviously mean that's some kind of tactical nuclear weapon. But on one hand, they say, most politicians say it's never going to happen. On the other hand, when you ask them, okay, why don't you let Ukraine strike Russian targets more, they say, well, there is this fear of escalation, nuclear escalation. So they are contradicting themselves. It can't be both at the same time. This is not Schrodinger's cat, okay, where you have two things at the same time. So this is a great development, and I'm sure that this is going to be dominating the talks. This topic, of course, is the crucial one. But how it's going to translate actually, what's happening on the ground, we're going to have to see. But for now, it's definitely a positive development.
And I wonder, where do you think this reluctance of some countries is coming from? Might it be perhaps connected to now the European parliamentary elections that are ahead, and now politicians are more focused on securing votes rather than thinking about greater good? What do you think?
Well, as I've said, the reluctance comes from basically two reasons, right? The first of all is this alleged nuclear threat, and of course the European Parliament elections are coming. They are afraid of hybrid warfare, hybrid threats. We had some examples of this potentially here in Poland. So that's why politicians are reluctant to really step on Russia's toes. But as we know, when you do that, when you show weakness, that's exactly what Russia likes, and that's exactly why they're going to escalate this, because this doesn't work the way some politicians, or most unfortunately, seem to think. Russia doesn't respond well to weakness. I mean, they respond well for themselves. Yes, they just see weakness and they escalate. So I don't know what the strategy is. I'm not sure if there really is a strategy here, unfortunately. It's full of contradictions. There are many statements that, tell Ukraine, yes, you can strike Russian targets now, but whether this is going to actually translate to what's happening on the ground, we're going to have to see, because I'm concerned if it's not just some kind of public relations, diplomatic expression, turn of phrase, but actually what's happening on the ground. We're going to have to see. Ukrainians are going to have to tell us if this is indeed, if this has indeed translated into action. Because for now, of course, these are just words, but it's better than nothing, right? Because of course, when the U.S. president says that you can strike limited strikes, but you can't do that, well, that's unprecedented. That has never happened before since the beginning of the war, of course. Because it's great that other countries have allowed Ukrainians to strike targets on Russian soil, but of course, the U.S. Let's not kill ourselves here, is the main player. So when the U.S. decides that yes, you can do that, that's a major event. But of course, we're going to have to see it. Of course, we're going to have to see Russia's response, because they keep getting these red lines, and one red line after another. And of course, right now, if there is a big strike, which is likely Ukrainian strike on Russian soil, we're going to see how they respond. That's the time when their threats, we're going to be calling their bluff, so to speak. We're going to see where it goes.
All right. So recently you said that Biden did say, at least verbally, that Ukraine can strike at least the border regions with Kharkiv. But I find it interesting that overall the U.S. is against any sort of ability for Ukraine to be able to strike within Russian territory. But at the same time, we have NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying that he sees no problem, he has no issue with it, and that Ukraine should be able to decide how to use these weapons as it sees fit. How can we explain this? Why is the NATO Secretary General speaking at cross purposes with the State Department?
That's a great question. There are many questions here that things that don't make much sense. Like I said, this escalation argument in itself is dubious. You say you can strike because there is this nuclear fear, but at the same time they say, Western politicians say that Putin is unlikely or he's not going to use nuclear weapons. It doesn't make any sense. If he's not going to use nuclear weapons, then what are you afraid of? Why can't Ukrainians just strike targets in Russia? Then there are a lot of contradictions here, and it probably is going to take a good psychologist to really figure it out what's going on. It doesn't make any sense. I agree with you. It's just it's contradictory, and a lot of people have tried to make sense of it. Maybe that's the idea. Maybe the idea is to keep Russians so confused that they don't really know where this is going. Maybe that's the idea. But it seems to me that it's just chaos and a lot of statements. Contradictions, and that's not a good sign because it sends a message to Russia that the West is basically weakened, that the West is not really unified, that this whole talk of defending NATO, every inch of NATO territory. Well, if the West is so not unified when discussing weapons and striking targets in Russia, then maybe we're going to test how they're going to react to some limited incursion, for example, on NATO territory. So this is not a good sign. There really should be more unity, and especially with U.S. leadership. This kind of yes, we want to help, but don't do this. Or apparently the Ukrainians did strike once. The Russian soil they did strike, but they were reprimanded by the U.S. and Germany. So this is really, this is just profoundly perplexing. Basically, that's how to put this. I guess that's the best way.
So I gather from what you're saying is that the West, so-called the West, is not performing, let's say not performing enough, and it's sending a clear message to Russia, like you mentioned, that it is divided, and seeing how now the US is not able to deliver, let's say, a strong standpoint, a strong leadership. Who do you think, or what kind of entity, do you think that NATO is enough now to take its place when it comes to leadership, or rather are we waiting now for someone to take over as a leader of the so-called West?
Well, that's another great question. And of course, the U.S., whether it likes it or not, has this position of the leader. And given, with Donald Trump's conviction, it's going to be interesting how this unfolds and who's really, going to become the next president and what kind of powers, it's really a complicated thing, right? When you might have a potentially next president who might be in prison. So that will be interesting in itself. So there are a lot of factors here they have never happened before. So that's going to have to be observed. I think more countries are looking at themselves, essentially. Poland, for example, that they need to be strong on their own. Of course, it's vital that, the external support is there. But unfortunately, it seems that more and more countries are realizing that we need to rely on ourselves. There is this talk of nuclear sharing more and more. And of course, Russia responds, especially Medvedev, with nuclear threats, as always. How credible is this guy? Well, obviously, we know that he seems not to be very credible, but some say that he is actually saying what the Kremlin would want to say, but diplomatically, they don't say it. So it's actually worth paying attention to what people like him are saying. Also, Sergei Karaganov, another person, right, who says that you need to strike, for example, Eastern Europe to basically avoid World War III. It's a strange logic, really strange, but that's how they think. So, it's really important for the West to get its act together because otherwise Russia is going to exploit our weakness and really need to be aware of this. And of course, hybrid warfare, Russia is using this successfully, sadly. And it's as effective as a direct military strike because it demoralizes societies. So it needs to be taken into account as well.
Very difficult times ahead, unfortunately, unless Europe gets its act together and acts in unison rather than just speaks in unison. Adam, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.